the way that people say community, which means like, oh, we've got a community of 500,000 because you've got that many followers on Instagram. That is not your community. They're people who like your brand and engage with it. But really your community are like those people who say, oh, you're looking for a gift. Have you tried Papier? I'm obsessed with them. I went to their office the other day. They did a journaling event. It's like they're your people. You want as many people saying that about your brand as possible.
Have you ever wondered why some brands grow exponentially, building legions of passionate fans that live and die by their logos, and some, well, don't? I do, all the time. And that's probably because I'm a massive brand nerd, but I believe there's a secret sauce at the core of every remarkable brand, a formula that sparks the growth of passionate communities of superfans, building a business and a reputation that will last for years to come. In this podcast, we tap into the greatest marketing minds in the world as they share the exact tactics and strategies used to build the world's greatest brands, dropping actionable insights every brand builder can apply. My name is Paul Archer, and I'm a specialist in brand advocacy and word of mouth. Having consulted for hundreds of brands on a topic, it's time to learn and build brand advocacy.
Hey, it's Verity here, your co-host of the Building Brand Advocacy podcast. Thank you so much for listening. We've got some incredible guests coming up, sharing insights and tips that can truly shift the marketing landscape. If you want to be the first to hear, make sure you hit that follow button. The more people following the show, the bigger and better we can make it. So if you're loving what you hear, don't forget to follow and spread the word. Thanks again for listening. It really means a lot. I hope you enjoy this next episode. Hello and welcome to Building Brand Advocacy. Today I welcome Holly Chapman to the show. Holly has over a decade of experience in brand, PR, community and the partnership space, and you're now head of brand at Papier.
I am, hi.
Welcome to the show. I am so excited to talk to you today, Holly. You have recently just spent 18 months in the US, so I want to get straight into that because that is such a bold and hands-on move that you've taken to obviously launch the brand in the market in the US. So what was the first priority that you did when you hit the ground?
Yeah, well, it was an amazing experience. So I would really recommend if anyone is kind of thinking about launching their brand in the US to kind of get that immersion. I think it's really important. I think for me, the strategy was really around kind of building brand relationships and networking. So here in the UK, we have lots of like great relationships with brands, people, companies, influencers who kind of all advocate for the brand and support our brand in like lots of different ways. And I think we had no one there. Yeah. So for us, the kind of first priority was really on starting to build our brand network. So for example, we have a great relationship with the Soho House team in the UK. So one of the first things I did was set up a meeting with the US team. And it's not about copy and paste, like, can we just get the exact same people? But I think it was about building those like initial relationships with those people to find ways of working and starting that conversation. So that was really the first priority when we got there. And I think something really impactful that we did in the first few weeks was meet with editors. And we hadn't kind of sorted our PR agency or any kind of PR support. So I kind of hand emailed like many editors of different types. So whether it was a commerce editor or a lifestyle editor, and really kind of got in front of them. And we really spoke about the brand. And it was interesting to know kind of what they liked about the brand and what they kind of thought was interesting or different, where they saw it fitting in their publication. And I think it was those conversations that were just so important as a first step.
Yeah. I mean, we're hearing so much about this two-way dialogue, and a lot of brands say that that's one of their main, like they have to have that two-way dialogue now with their customers, but obviously from a PR point of view as well. And like as you said, how did that kind of overall then, that kind of first thing, the priority, how did that shape the strategy going forward?
So from kind of those initial conversations and networking, it then kind of enabled us to pull out kind of the key pillars that we were going to focus on for the US. So from those conversations, we really kind of tried to learn what was most relevant and drive that relevancy. So we thought about what partnerships we were going to launch, and we knew that that was a really important part of whatever we were going to do in the US. So it then kind of informed what we did partnerships-wise, what we did with the media, how we kind of worked with them, how we thought about community. So I met up with like a lot of different creators, how we thought about building our community, what we were going to set up. And I think we quickly understood in the US that the payment fees were much higher than in the UK. So from those conversations, we then kind of worked out, okay, what's our budget going to be, and how are we going to play this, and how are we going to stand out? And I think for us, we kind of realized pretty early on that we needed that kind of grassroots community building. So that kind of became a really like integral part of the strategy and structure of what we did there.
What was their like response to the brand? Because I mean, here it's like the coolest stationery brand, right?
I hope so.
I think so. And what was their like initial response to the brand?
Yeah, so again, like in the UK, you can rely on that brand awareness to get you quite far in a lot of conversations with influencers. So that like they don't know anything about us. I think what they loved about us was the design-led and the aesthetic. And I think that kind of got us a really long way. I think another really cool part of storytelling was around like the collaborations that we do and did. And I think that also was really impactful in the first kind of couple of months and years really in the US. So I think that's what they loved, and they definitely picked that out. And I think also it's kind of the versatility of our product. And I think we learned pretty early on that like it works for lots of people. So we have a wellness journal. So great, we can talk to that like wellness vertical, but we also have a productivity planner. So we can also talk to entrepreneurs and founders. So I think we quickly kind of found our niches that we wanted to speak to and kind of went from there. But I think overall, the design and aesthetic was something that stood out as like a key kind of selling point.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of like, because obviously you embedded yourself in the US for 18 months, what do you think were your main insights from doing that you felt that you probably wouldn't have been able to do that if you obviously were trying to build the brand from the UK?
Yeah, I think you can get a lot from surveys, and you can get a lot from data and analytics. So like it's not very helpful for me to understand like what people are buying in Tennessee, because we can see that from our sales data. But for example, I think what you can't get is those like conversational pieces, and you can't get that qualitative data. So I think something that we learned pretty early on was around kind of our Britishness and how important or not important that was in the US. And I think that we decided to lean on that. And so kind of one of our core messaging pillars is around like created in London, designed in London. And that's something that we felt was important in the US. And when we actually launched there, we did a big dinner, and it was like a big British dinner. It was like, it wasn't a roast, but it was at a very kind of British...
I want to know what was on that dinner plate.
It was kind of a British style sort of, not a pub, but a chic, beautiful restaurant. It's called Freeman's in New York. And that was kind of how we kind of set that tone with people. But I don't know if we would have necessarily gotten that from just a survey, because how do you ask that? Like, do you care that we're British? Like, I don't know. It's kind of a hard question to ask. So I think that was something that was really important for us. And then I think just understanding the nuances of the market. And I think perhaps going there, lots of brands might think that, oh, it's the US, like we've just got to crack the US. And that's true. But really the US is micro markets, and New York is very different to LA. That's very different to, like the southern states, and Texas also very different. So I think that when we kind of were there, we were able to understand what was important to that customer in that particular place. So in New York, they really value convenience, and being there, like, yeah, they do. So for us, it was like, okay, we knew then we need to be in retailers here, because they want to be able to pick up a notebook when they want it at any time of day or night. Whereas, for example, in LA, it's kind of, it's not that shopping culture.
Okay.
So they're happy to kind of buy online, but it's more around kind of how the cover of the product and then being seen with it. So I'd say they're kind of a bit more into the aesthetic and style, and kind of that wellness product does really well there.
That's really interesting. And you're right, like a survey can tick a few boxes, but actually having those conversations means you can go a lot more in depth and just find out a lot more. And it's the building the connection piece as well, which is super, super key. So for brands that are sort of eyeing the US up, what do you think is the one thing that they need to get right before they go out there and launch?
I think it's just answering one question, which is just what makes your brand different. That's kind of the key question to answer. Like, what are you creating for the US that they don't already have, and how do you kind of translate that and make sure that you're messaging that? So for us, it was like our design and kind of that kind of piece all around that. But I think if you answer that, there's probably other key questions you could ask, but if you're going to keep it really simple, I think you need to understand your story as well and kind of be very clear. You can't be vague. Who are you targeting with your product? So for us, we're very clear on who our customer is, and she's slightly older in the US than in the UK, but we really are targeting that millennial. We're not trying to target, everybody. And I think you just have to be quite specific with what you're going in with. But I think that, and then also having everything set up for success, in the back end and being able to deliver. So for us, we print everything in the US. So it means that, sustainability wise and getting things to you on time, it's kind of, we need all of that in place before we could kind of go and launch there. And we knew we needed that.
Back in the UK now then, obviously. Have you built a team over in the US?
Yes, yeah. So we have kind of have a remote team in the US, but our kind of more senior roles are all still back in the UK. And I just get to travel, which is really nice. So I still get to go back. Yeah, exactly. But I think, I loved New York and would live there again in a heartbeat. But I think when I came back to London, I was like, oh, wow, like I can breathe here. Yeah. Like it is a different pace.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not for everyone.
How do you think that experience then has kind of thinking about the whole brand building and kind of growth piece, how has that really shaped your strategy overall, do you think?
I think before we launched and grew in the US, I think I didn't really think as broadly around kind of growth. I think growth has when I even say the word growth, I'm imagining like a graph going up. And I actually think that since doing this, I really think about like brand strategy as an ecosystem. And because we couldn't rely on like one billboard, we don't have the budgets if we wanted to do a billboard campaign, but we couldn't just rely on this like one ta-da moment, just one channel. I think that it kind of has made me aware of like all the different areas that really kind of contribute to growth. So it is kind of the partnerships piece, it's community, it's PR, it's organic social, it's your team, your team as influencers and the influence they have, and I kind of think it's all of those pieces together. And I think we're now really good at thinking about our brand as an ecosystem rather than just on kind of thinking about like share of voice or thinking it's about how all of those channels contribute. And in the US, we really couldn't just rely on one. So that was important.
I mean, obviously you cover brand, community, PR, partnerships in terms of, so with all thinking about all of that together, there's no specific kind of like tactic that you think has had the most traction for the brand
in the US or in general?
In general,
I think that if you were going to kind of look at our brand, our timeline of our brand, I think where we've seen the most buzz and kind of growth is where we've launched partnerships. And we think about partnerships in lots of different ways. But I think for us, collaborations was a really key part of growing our brand, and it enabled us to get in front of new audiences.
Yeah.
And that's exactly the same in the US too. So when we got there, I arrived in February, and by the May, we were launching a partnership with the Met in New York. So very kind of central to that market and an iconic institution, but well known throughout the US. And I think it set our intention that the US was important to us. So we're not just going to launch a collaboration here that is not relevant, doesn't resonate. And I think overall partnerships has been really key. And something else that I'm really passionate about, because my background is communications, is always that PR piece. And I think PR has been something that has been always on for us. Yeah. And having that outlet to tell our stories, we're now like an editor favorite in the UK. It's quite different now. We're kind of trying to think about how we can, do something that makes us stand out again, and how we can kind of create a bit more buzz in the UK. Whereas in the US, we were like a new brand, and we were kind of thinking about how we can tell our story and what our messaging is beyond just like our products. So, we really stand for like creativity and self-expression, and how does that come to life in the articles that are written about you? And I think like partnerships and media have been really key alongside kind of our community piece. But I think that you can, when you ask people about Papier, they're like, oh, I saw that you did that product with, the Met or Rosie Asselin, or we've done some really cool stuff with Headspace or Away. I think that people kind of remember those moments.
Yeah. I'd love to kind of just, I've heard a few really interesting conversations around partnerships and how that's evolving for brands. And obviously you said like you do it in lots of different ways. I'd love to just kind of, I don't know, tap into your strategy, I suppose, with the partnership piece a little bit more, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course. I love talking about partnerships. Yeah, we think about them in a few different ways. So I guess there's that collaborations bucket that we kind of already have covered. So that's where we would create a product with a design on that's co-created. They're resource heavy but high impact, so really good for press. And I think we've used to do a lot more of those, and we've moved away from doing as many because they're so time intensive. Right. But I think that there's still a really important place for them. And I think we'll kind of see more and more. I think as kind of a trend coming through will probably be those like kind of creator partnerships within that. So I think maybe brands will look to kind of work with creators on creating product. So I think that kind of collaboration piece has really been key for us. And then we think about just more generally brand partnerships. And that might be where we work with Alo Yoga, Away, Headspace. We haven't created a product with them, but maybe we've done an event with them. So we did a yoga class with Alo Yoga. We did some fun things with Soul Cycle for Valentine's Day. And it's kind of those brand partnerships where a brand you love, like you might not know us at all, but if you're a Soul Cycle user and you've come to that class, you're like, oh, there's this cool brand that they've done this cool thing. And I think that we find that those are less resource heavy to execute, but just as impactful. So we love doing stuff like that. And then we think about partnerships kind of in the editorial space. So how do we make sure our content is relevant in terms of like who we're speaking to on our blog, or we've actually got a newspaper coming out, so who we're kind of going to be featuring on that. And then there's also kind of the influencer and community partnerships. So we think of like influencer as like tastemakers, where there might be more kind of top of funnel and people who are kind of ambassadors for your brand. And then there's kind of the community piece, which is like your customers and your advocates. And we do still think about like partnerships that are relevant with them, whether it's like a one-on-one partnership or whether it's like supporting a community that they're passionate about. So I think there's kind of all those different ways that partnerships is kind of covered.
That's incredible. And so impactful as well. I mean, I love the whole idea of not necessarily creating a product with someone, but just that awareness piece of like collaborating with the right people at the right event at the right time, and just, yeah, like I said, how impactful that can be. And you mentioned there about obviously brands kind of collaborating with creators, and there is a bit of a buzzword at the moment, like with this whole co-creation piece. I mean, I've talked about it a lot. I suppose, yeah, just going back to that a little bit, how do you kind of see the relationship between brands and creators evolving? And obviously we can tap into that co-creation piece a little bit more, but do you see anything else happening between that relationship?
Yeah, definitely. I think there's so much happening that I think, one thing is really moving away from that more transactional relationship. I think consumers are just so savvy to like those posts where it's like, buy this notebook, or like, I'm obsessed with this hot chocolate. And it's like, you're obsessed with tea last week. Like, come on. I think that we're definitely kind of seeing that trend. And at Papier, it's definitely something that we're trying to move away from and to kind of think more authentically about the partnership we have with that person. So it might be supporting a life event for them rather than it just being like a paid post about something that's not relevant. So I think it's kind of moving more towards that partnership piece. I was on a shoot the other day. We were shooting our holiday campaign and we were using kind of a tastemaker and influencer as one of our models. And she was like, oh, do you know what's great? Like, I'm actually being asked to be a creative director on shoots. And I'm like, that's really cool. And it got me kind of thinking about it. And we're launching in the summer, one of our cohorts of customers is students, which is quite different from the rest of the year, but we sell a planner which is for students. And I was like, we should have a like Gen Z, like younger audience. We should have someone come and kind of support us with creative direction on the shoot. And I think that's what we're going to do for our kind of summer shoot next year, because I think it's just a more interesting way of it's getting that perspective that we might be missing, but it's also kind of if they're also then telling their community about their experience working with us, I think it just makes the partnership with that person just more authentic and overall just like much stronger. So I think that we're kind of moving away to a more kind of mutual partnership together. And then I think other trends we're seeing is sort of the rise of different platforms. And I'm personally very excited about Substack. It feels like podcasting is back too. And I think it's like, how do we work with creators in supporting their endeavors, and whether that is their Substack. So could you become a headline sponsor for their Substack, or whether it's, an affiliate link in their Substack, or, working with them in their community building efforts. So we love working with people who are like, oh, I'm obsessed with like vision boarding. Could I create an event with you? And it's like, yes, like we love that. That's so much more interesting than kind of just this sort of inauthentic kind of paid ad style.
Yeah.
So I think that's kind of how I'm seeing it shift. And I think it's evolving really quickly. But brands who kind of keep up and are able to kind of maintain those relationships and conversations with their kind of key ambassadors and kind of connect with them in a more interesting way, I think will kind of win in that space.
Absolutely. I mean, we've really interesting what you're saying about some of these other platforms that are coming up. I was at an event last week actually, and they were saying about platforms are now kind of like blurring together, because I mean, I wrote a post about this as well, and someone was kind of complaining. I saw about a month ago that LinkedIn was becoming like, here's my day in the life of, and all of these kind of things. And they were like, it's not Instagram, take it elsewhere. But we're seeing now Instagram taking on more forms of like LinkedIn, for example. So it's blurring. And while that's happening, there seems to be a space that's opening up for, and obviously like with Twitter, like like dying a death, like obviously it is opening up more space for things like Blue Sky. But I was really interested to hear what you said about Substack as well. And yeah, I think that's super interesting for next year, particularly in terms of how brands are going to adapt and where they're going to go, and yeah, take it to the next level. You mentioned about your advocates, and I was just wondering, what have you found to be some really great channels or some really great ways to kind of like harness your advocates with the brand?
We're really into our Papier broadcast channel at the moment. I don't know if other brands have kind of been experimenting in this space. I know Refi have done a really good job, and they were kind of our inspiration.
Awesome.
And we hope one day to have 12,000 members as they do. But at the moment we have like 1,400 members with our broadcast channel. And the way that we're kind of using that is really, they're kind of our most passionate customers. And so we love to give them exclusive offers, exclusive content that they can't kind of get anywhere else. And that's kind of been working really well. And it's something I'm particularly excited about. And I think we're also kind of using that group of people along with our pen pals, who are kind of our more traditional ambassadors that we kind of have often paid relationships with, but not always. We're kind of using them more in terms of our like product development and our kind of thinking about our design and aesthetic and getting kind of more feedback. So I think brands who use their customers and advocates in the right way and kind of engage them. I think people love to vote on colors, and then they're more likely to buy it. So like we launched a really fun limited edition cap. I'll send you one. It's really cool. It says Paper Purse on the front, and had lots of different colors, and we had people choose like which one they wanted. And then when they kind of came out, they're not available to buy on site. So you can only really get them if you participate in activity with us. So whether that's like sharing a post or taking a photo of our wild posters in London or in New York. And we found that because they had kind of been part of the design process and choosing the color and how it kind of looked, that people were much more excited to kind of get one. And it has become this kind of covetable item, which I think is pretty fun.
Yeah, definitely. Do you think like with the private spaces, because obviously that's one of the things that's coming up in conversation around 2025, and we've talked about it a lot this year as well, around dark social, and obviously going back to your like broadcast channel, and it sounds like it's not just another channel, it's you guys actually fostering more of a conversation with your fans. Like, do you see that kind of like, where do you see the sort of like the dark space for you guys, and how are you going to sort of like keep utilizing these private spaces to have that two-way dialogue, I suppose?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for January, we're kind of bringing back our event series where like they're very small community-driven events. They're not particularly scalable. And I think that's where, as your brand grows, it's kind of like, you're always trying to get as much ROI out of everything that you do. And I think we've been missing that connection point. So we've kind of decided to bring them back. And we're hosting sort of journaling, vision board workshops, scrapbooking with our kind of community. So these are not events for influencers. They're not press events. They're for people who love our brand and also want to connect with each other. And I think that is really important as you're kind of growing your brand. Like, how do you give access to your customers to either tastemakers and creators or to your actual brand, and bring them in behind the scenes and kind of, we're hosting a lot of them at our office, which we call Maison Papier. And it is, it's a lovely office, but it's not, this £5,000 event that we're hosting. And I think it's kind of, but people, when they come to our office, we've hosted panels and talks there, it's like, oh God, this is where it happens. Like, this is where the products are designed. Yeah. And, we do have like a photo shoot studio, and there's often shoots going on at the same time. And I think people love to kind of be brought in. And I think it is about those, our broadcast channel is great for those conversations. And then it's like, how do we then also bring that to life? And, it's not necessarily about these big glitzy
it doesn't need
events.
to be.
It doesn't need to be. It can be really, I think, as long as it's, centered around your product and your brand values. So ours is creativity, which is amazing because so much stuff is creative, whether it's a painting workshop, whether it's like a walk in the wild and you sketching birds on the way. I think our product, like, we're so lucky, it's so versatile. But even if you had a sportswear brand, I think there's just so much rich material kind of in anything if you really want to dive into it. But I think it's just using those verticals to create, it is an opportunity to create content, but really it's about creating community, and not just in the way that people say community, which means like, oh, we've got a community of 500,000 because you've got that many followers on Instagram. That is not your community. They're people who like your brand and engage with it, but really your community are like those people who say, oh, you're looking for a gift? Have you tried Papier? I'm obsessed with them. I went to their office the other day. They did a journaling event. It's like they're your people that you kind of, and you want as many people saying that about your brand as possible.
I also loved what you said about that they get to connect with each other and not just with the brand as well. And I think that for me, like, having these conversations has become really key in terms of that growth of that community. And one brand really sticks out for me, and we interviewed the founder of Scamp and Dude, and that community is just next level when you hear the stories of how they do actually connect. Like, they go around to each other's houses and drink wine and watch Joe go live on Instagram. And I think the friendships that are made is just so powerful because they'll just keep talking and talking and talking, like you said. Like, it is that you want them to be that advocate, the sort of storytellers on the ground on behalf of you, but that friendship piece and that connection piece and is just super cool. And like you said, getting them together is just as important as meeting you guys, I suppose.
Oh, you're probably more so. And I think, like, in our everyday life, if you just sort of zoom out from like work, it's like, how many opportunities do you get to kind of do that and connect? And for me, I'm a member of a few book clubs, and I cherish that time, and I love that time away from my family and just kind of being able to talk about something new. And I think if you can kind of find a passion that people are interested in that relates to your product too, like, that's just like a win-win. And I think it's what we're all craving. I think it's like a macro trend in general, not just in kind of brand marketing.
Yeah, absolutely. Holly, you've had over a decade of experience. I said at the start. What do you think has been the most valuable lesson that you've learned about building like really strong and like enduring brands?
I think it's about not putting all your eggs in one basket, and it's kind of about testing different channels, and it's kind of not making too much of a stand on like doing only one specific thing, or saying like, oh, we're never going to do paid influence, start kind of being too rash in those decisions, especially in the early days. I think enduring brands are ones that have connection with you. And I think whether that's a connection through a partnership or community event, and I think that's what we're always aiming to kind of build. And I think with Papier especially, the product lends itself, like I said, to just so many different milestones and events. And, acts of creative expression that I think it's kind of, we're very lucky in that way. But I think the best brands really kind of make you fall in love with them and make you trust them. And yeah, I think for me, it's kind of been about making the small, intentional, sometimes non-scalable efforts are actually the ones that you need to do, those foundational pieces to then get that scale and get that growth. And, you know, eventually Nike don't need to do as much of this anymore. Although maybe they do with their
maybe
they do need to kind of go back to their roots a little bit and think about how they're kind of engaging their brand and community. But I think in general, it's those like smaller intentional efforts that are important to do.
Yeah. Like I said, I think it's the simple effort, you know, like I was just thinking, like, we're kind of like going back onto a conversation here, but, you know, we held an event, it'll be this time last year, and we just had it in what was our office then. And, you know, it's actually quite, you know, it was a lovely space once you get inside the office, but going in and like, you know, we all just sat on these like really big office chairs, but we held like this really small intimate panel. And it was the first time we'd ever got our community together. It was the first ever like live podcast that we did. But it was so intimate and just so lovely and like really cheap. We just got loads of pizza and just bought loads of wine and like, it was great. Like, yeah, just want to do more of that. And I really like the analogy of like bonfire, firework, like in terms of like how to keep that buzz going throughout the year. You don't always need big firework displays.
No, it's definitely like those pulse points. And, you know, maybe your hero is the big collaboration. But, you know, we're launching our campaign in January around like just start. And it's all about like whatever you've wanted to do, just do it, just start it, you know, put pen to paper and really kind of be intentional. And for that, you know, our hero is not a collaboration. Our kind of, our pulse points really are those like community activations and events around all the things that you might want to start, whether it's like, you know, setting your intentions and doing your vision boarding, or whether it's about building your personal brand on LinkedIn, or in other ways
everybody's doing now.
Which everybody is doing. And yeah, I think it's kind of, we all have those little micro and sometimes macro goals. And I think for us, it's like, how do we kind of tie our campaign into like the overall feeling, but then not always rely on this, like big out of home campaign, which, you know, with a startup budget is not always kind of realistic to kind of achieve. And I actually think if we, you know, if you do go in with an all guns blazing, like out of home or a celebrity campaign, I think it's that on its own is not, there's nothing, it's just kind of crickets afterwards. So yeah, it's definitely that. And I think it's also about like anything you do is maximizing it. So we did a while posting campaign recently. We had these pink posters all around London just ahead of Black Friday. And the way that, you know, the posters on their own, quite cost effective to do, but on their own, it's just posters. But it was kind of the way that we thought about it was around, okay, how do we get people talking about these posters? How do we get people sharing them? And so we did a big kind of thunderclap moment on LinkedIn where I think there are 120 people at Papier. We got every single person to post, and they were incentivized to post with the posters. And it's actually that activity, that maximizing it, that people saw. Rather than the post. You might not be in London, but you probably saw a LinkedIn post, or you probably saw a post on Instagram around it. And people were like going out there trying to get our caps by resharing it. And I think that's something I've also probably learned is just sort of whatever you're doing, whether it is a community event or, you know, it can just be pizzas in your office.
Yeah.
But, you know, are you getting content with that? Are you getting feedback from people who are there to ask them what are they interested in? Why did they attend this event? You know, whatever you're doing, just make sure you maximize and make it worthwhile.
Awesome. And in terms of like your specific role, head of brand, like how do you think it's evolved? Because I don't want to talk about this divide between like performance and brand, because I don't think it should be. I think we should, you know, like I think it should all work together holistically. But obviously it does kind of feel like more and more conversations are more towards like the brand side of things these days. So yeah, how has it evolved for you? Like, where do you see it going sort of over the next sort of like 3 to 5 years?
I think we have seen the dominance of paid and performance marketing, especially in terms of spend and kind of the way that lots of brands have been positioning themselves. They've really been relying on that kind of media to bring in new customers rather than kind of fostering other avenues to attract them. And I do think that has shifted definitely in the last 12 months, like you've mentioned. I think it's great to see brand leaders have more of a voice at the table. I think it still remains challenging to kind of put a number on everything that you're doing. But I think people are more open-minded now about the impact of brand. And we've also seen the fact that with lots of brands who haven't done, they haven't been doing community, their organic social is stiff and stale. I think you're seeing that their ads are not performing well. So we're seeing this, like, again, the word ecosystem. Like, we're seeing that everything sits in an ecosystem. So if your brand is not performing, your ads are not performing.
Yeah.
And I think we're seeing more now, or hopefully in the next 3 to 5 years, we'll be seeing more of that collaboration between performance and brand.
Yeah, hopefully.
And
then one thing that I have to ask everybody, how do you build brand advocacy?
Lots of different ways. We really kind of think about advocacy in a few different pillars. So we think about it from our kind of influencer lens, we think about it from our customer lens, and then we also think about it from like our brand networking lens. And that's kind of that piece I was talking to at the beginning of the conversation around like those people that you meet who then kind of are like, oh, suggest your brand for something, for an experience. And I think that we think about it in those different ways. And advocacy is not just that like mention me referral code.
Yeah.
And I think that is what some people think advocacy is. I think it is those kind of word of mouth kind of, what would you say that is? Sorry.
It's okay.
It is word of mouth rather than just sort of
the like bog standard kind of like, you know, here's 10% off. Like,
yeah,
you know,
I hate that.
Yeah.
And I think everyone can see through that. And I think it's just, you know, is the content you put out, like, are you giving value to your customers in that way? Like, why should they follow you? Are you inspiring them? Advocacy is so many different things, and you want to, you know, induce as many different ways for people to talk about how great your brand is as possible. And it's not just the mention, it's only mention me, but it's not just that kind of referral piece. I think there's so many other ways, and we try to think about it in kind of within our brand ecosystem and holistically.
Awesome. Holly, where can people find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn. I think it's going to be a hot platform for next year.
Yeah.
So LinkedIn, I'm Holly Chapman. Or you can send me an email if it's kind of Papier related. I'm holly@papier.com. Or you can write me a letter. I would love that. Send me a note.
Holly, this has been so insightful. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
That was another episode of Building Brand Advocacy, the world's top brand building podcast. To find out more about building brand advocacy and how this podcast is part of a bigger plan for our brand building cookbook, then make sure to search for Building Brand Advocacy in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are found, and make sure that you click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Thanks to Duel for sponsoring. To find out more, go to www.duel.tech, that's duel.tech. And on behalf of the team here at Building Brand Advocacy, thanks for listening.